Thanks. It's okay, I got it. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, delegates, hard-bitten negotiators, activists. Is that everybody? Thank you very much. Welcome to Gender Day, and welcome to this UNFCCC high-level event on the economic case for gender-responsive climate action. My name is Rachel Kite. I am the Secretary-General's Special Representative for Sustainable Energy for All and CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. The economic case for gender-responsive climate action is clear, I think. It's built into the very fabric of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and into the Paris Agreement. The economic transformation that implementing these two sets of agreements means requires that women be placed at the very heart of policy making and of the politics that will drive our economy over the next decades. I think that some congratulations are in order. We have a GCF that has a gender policy, and because I'm getting lots of signals from some people who are very, very excited about this, almost as excited as I am, last week we got a decision to approve a gender action plan here at the COP. As we say where I come from small acorns, mighty oaks grow. So I suspect that nearly all of you are in the room because you're already aware of how important this is. The challenge is, and our objective here today, is how to spread the word beyond this room, how to convince those who are unconvinced, and how to lift up and amplify the voices of those who already are convinced and have the evidence and data to back up their arguments. And so this is an event which is about lifting our collective ambition. It is a microcosm of what this COP is all about. And so to do that, we have an extremely esteemed panel, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But first, I would like to welcome, and I'm deeply honoured to be able to welcome, Her Excellency Merasini Vuniawaka, the Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation from our hosts, Fiji, for this COP. And I'm inviting her to make a few introductory remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Ms. Rachel Kite, the Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa, and distinguished panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bulavinaka, Guten Tag, and good morning to you all. President Barack Obama once said that communities that give their daughters the same opportunities as their sons are more peaceful, they're more prosperous, they develop faster, and they're more likely to succeed. This has become so obvious over the last several decades that it almost goes without saying, oh, it should. And yet, President Obama felt compelled to remind us of this just 2 years ago. That is possibly because it is easy to plan development policies or investments at a macro level without factoring in specific targeting for women and girls. The assumption, I think, is that everyone will benefit. There's no lack of goodwill toward women, only an unconscious bias, mostly. But it is important to have specific objectives for women and specific actions that target women in any economic or investment program. And if that is true in general, it is especially true in programs that respond to climate change, whether we are talking about mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. If we understand the special place women have in our communities and act accordingly, we don't just do nice things for women. We create stronger programs. We have more effective responses. We build better communities, resilient ones. This is especially true in climate action. Climate change severely impacts women economically because of the roles we play in our communities, especially in the poorest communities or the poorest countries. Climate change is especially harsh for women, largely because we are overrepresented among the world's poor and are thus more exposed to these dangers. And women typically are critical to keeping communities together. They care for the children, they maintain traditions that give stability to villages, clans, and other communities. In some areas of the world, they raise up to 80% of the food. Ironically, the poorer a community is, the more it depends on women, and the greater the burden on women, particularly in times of stress. Climate change makes it harder for people to escape poverty. Extreme weather events affect more women than men globally. The more extreme, the bigger the gender gap. Survival in a disaster is influenced by social circumstances, such as poverty, social restrictions, roles in decision-making, and even something as basic as knowing how to swim in times of emergency or migrations. Women in rural, vulnerable communities may have to walk long distances just to fetch water if their men have to seek work elsewhere due to circumstances brought about by climate change. We are left alone to fend for our households. So yes, as we respond to climate change in each community, both socially based and economically based investors need to ask some simple questions. We could ask, how will this benefit women? What do women need? But more importantly, the question should be, how do we design our investments so that the roles and situations of both men and women can be used to greatest advantage to support the community? How do we ensure that we have not created an unequal platform because we did not consider the roles women play? How can we ensure that we develop solutions that are equitable, not just in design, but in practice, and not just now, but 5 or 10 years down the road? The answers to these questions will ensure that women and girls remain in the center of climate solutions. The Fijian presidency, hosting COP23, together with the UNFCCC, has reiterated the importance of the equitable involvement of women in sustainable development and the implementation of climate policies, including the Gender Action Plan. This dialogue on the topic of the economic case for gender-responsive climate action will highlight the compelling economic reasons why governments are seeking or promoting and investors are funding climate policies and actions that have gender in all its ramifications as a core element. It simply makes sense to unleash the potential for all citizens and to understand how all citizens fit into a community mosaic before we go about designing solutions to problems. So this is partly about equity, but it is also simply right. I want to encourage you to visit the marketplace, showcasing products and services that support the implementation of gender-responsive climate policy and action. This will take place from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the Northeast Walkway in the Bond Zone. Distinguished delegates, I know I don't need to remind the people in this room that we have to put women and girls at the center of our efforts if we want to succeed. I wish you all the very best in today's deliberations. Vinakabakalevu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much indeed for those wise words, and thank you for all you're doing as the presidency to keep this focus on gender-responsive climate action at the forefronts of our minds as we go through this important COP. So let me introduce this distinguished panel, and then we're going to get into a conversation. I want to give a health warning now to the panel. So we're going to talk about gender-responsive climate action, but I think we've got some plans agreed now. So I think it would be really great in the course of the next 50 minutes or so to really talk about what's it going to take to turn these words into action from whichever perspective we bring to the panel. So first of all, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Fiame Naomi Matafa, Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa and also Minister of Natural Resources and Environment. Long history of leadership in the beautiful country of Samoa, and I think first appointed to the cabinet in 1991. So lots of wisdom, lots of experience. Thank you very much for joining us. Next to the Deputy Prime Minister, needing very little introduction, is Achim Steiner, now the Administrator of UNDP, which was a position he took over this summer. But many of you will know him from a long history of international service, including 10 years at the head of UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. Next to him, we're very pleased to welcome Veronica Alias, who is the Deputy Mayor for Environment from the city of Quito. Thank you very much indeed. We were with your colleague yesterday on other sessions, and it's wonderful to have such a strong perspective coming out. And I think we all know that cities are now playing a bigger and bigger part of the action agenda going forward. Next to Veronica is my old colleague Hart Schaefer. Welcome, Hart. Hart is the Vice President for Global Themes, and that includes both gender and climate change at the World Bank. Long history in the international system and lots of leadership on issues of sustainable development over his career. And next to him is Fiza Fahan, who's an entrepreneur, so at the pointy end of business. Thank you very much. She's also a development expert from Pakistan and sits on the Secretary General's high-level panel for women's economic empowerment. So we've got private sector perspectives, people working in the economy, finance, development, the city perspective, and central government. So we should be able to have a very fluid conversation. So the first question is really, and perhaps to you, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, is why is the gender responsive policy important in the first place, and what can its impact be if it's carried through from words on paper into action?
Okay. Talofa, good morning, everyone. Well, I think the answer to that question speaks really to the broader issue of equality for women. And that if we have all our citizens participating fully, our respective communities can only benefit from everyone firing, so to speak. Is that a short answer?
That's a beautiful answer. And from your lips to somebody's ears, what needs to happen to, I mean, in your experience, how have actions, or how does the women's equality agenda and the climate change agenda, where do they meet for you?
I think really the point that we've got to, and I'm sure many of the other countries and communities have come to this, it's really about mainstreaming and integrating gender issues into whatever issue that you are addressing. So that's the approach that my government has taken. It's mainstreaming. I think the other thing too is having an approach that is strength-based. And in that respect, I'm sort of referencing traditional practice. In our communities and in our traditional societies, there are gender roles and functions. And really ensuring that those roles and functions are working and working well, and that we're not actually developing processes and approaches that may go against that. And in fact, I think it may have been the experience of many developing countries especially, whereas, perhaps the policy planning or the approaches, and especially from donor perspectives, has been framed, from a particular philosophy, so to speak, and it's been transported. So I think, the evolution of the partnerships of the global community is such where, in the spirit of what is being promoted here as the Talanoa, this is really, having that discussion and having that debate to come to a common understanding of common objectives.
Thank you very much. So Achim, you sit at the, right in the centre of a massive global development industry, right? I don't know if industry is the right word, but I mean, having taken on the mantle of UNDP, you're relatively new in the job. UNDP's got a long track record of working on climate and on working on gender and trying to mainstream issues into development. What does it look like from your vantage point?
Well, in some respects, very self-evident, and in other respects, surprisingly behind the curve. And I think one of the things that I discovered as I was preparing to join you for this panel here is how few INDCs or NDCs subsequently actually had any kind of gender disaggregation whatsoever. And I think in the context of where UNDP works today, which is the UN's development program, I'm also trying to bring perhaps a more contemporary view of how you look at your client base, because at the end of the day, much of what we are arguing for and that needs to happen to address the challenge of climate change has to do with investing in different futures, whether sectoral, technological, productive futures, and trying to understand how you can best invest in people means you need to understand your client base. And I often am intrigued by how platforms such as Uber or Amazon or many others, I mean, it doesn't always have to be the big names, are able to know their clients so much better than we do. And part of that is to be able to disaggregate by gender, by income, by location. And I think when you take climate change and look at the reality, first of all, of sectors such as agriculture, where women are, a dominant part of driving the future of agriculture, and yet in the way that we design programs and responses, invest in the capacity to change and transform, if you don't disaggregate by gender, you're missing often some of the most fundamental conditions. Access to land, ownership, finance, credit. And the same is true for energy. And so in our work, I think what we are trying to recognize is, first of all, how far behind the curve we are collectively, and how projects and programs that we can be part of can catalyze and accelerate a better understanding of how gender informs both the effectiveness but also the economics of climate action and investments.
Thank you. Maybe we flip now to a city perspective. So I think we've heard from you and colleagues over the last couple of days, Quito's on the leading edge of thinking about the city action of becoming a cleaner, more equitable economic environment. You're on the leading edge of issues related to finance flowing into cities for green growth. How does the climate and gender, how do the climate and gender agendas match? I mean, what does a gender perspective on climate action look like at the city level?
Yeah, I would like, first of all, to put this in a context. Quito, as a capital city of Ecuador, is surrounded by mountains. 90% of the territory is rural, and just 10% urban. So we have to look at the territory integrally, since we have two main threats of climate change. First of all, wildfires in the rural areas that affects directly to women, and in the urban areas for a flood and probably, I would say, food security. So for the last decade, we have been working in an integral way to promote and support women for to increase their economy, since 60% of women in Ecuador are female-head households. So what we have done is to give them technical assistance, to give them an opportunity to understand the economy, a small economy, and scaling up in these bioferias that they can show their products, they can interact each other, and they can increase their incomes monthly. They have increased their income, for example, from $100 monthly to $300, specifically with this type of urban agriculture. So we right now have like 2,500 urban gardens, and that produces food. They interact each other, they sell each other in their neighborhoods, and I would say that 71% is run by women. And in another side, with the rural areas, we have been working with women also because we have some problems of water. In the mountains, even though it's very, very close to the city, and the water comes from these mountains, in the rural areas, there are not access to water, so women is always who goes to bring the water home. And with the wildfires that happens, for example, 3 years ago, all the forest was burned. So we started to make the connection and show them that climate change is affecting them. So we start to build channels of water, reforestation, give them an opportunity to know to have the technical assistance. They have now these parts of where they can grow trees to reforestate where the areas were burned, and also they have a sustainable agriculture with organic products. So this holistic approach with women and climate change, Quito has been recognized, and we are honored this night to have an award from the Momentum UN award. So that's our job in the last decade. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, absolutely. So congratulations on the Momentum Award, and it's a great segue to you, Hart. So Veronica's talking about involving women in an economic model which is going to lead to a cleaner growth, right? So climate action from economic models with women's participation differently framed. So you sit in the management of the World Bank Group that has a long, proud history of work on gender and a long, proud history of work on climate. How do you see how the two come together, and how can the bank support its clients to lead change?
Well, thanks, Rachel. I think today being Gender Day at COP23, it actually brings together two of the pillars of the World Bank strategy of our ambition is to eliminate extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity. And we realize that we cannot do that without paying due attention to both climate change and gender. We have to look at both. And let me give you a couple of examples. When we do our work of like assessing vulnerability, we look at how it affects men and women differently. Give you an example. In 1991, Bangladesh had a flood, a huge flood. Mortality rates among men were about 15 over 1,000 people. Among women, it was 75. So very clearly, there was something that had not happened to reach the women, to go to shelters, and so on. So our intervention then was to first socialize cyclone shelters with women, but also to make sure that the messages, the early emergency messages, were read by women announcers to reach women. Same thing when you go to Uganda agriculture, we realize that the messages from the Extension Service are not reaching women as much as they reach men, because 80% of the men listen to the weather forecast on the radio, but only 20% of the women. So our intervention has to be custom tailored and has to use channels that actually reaches women. So what we are doing now is, in all our interventions, we are actually measuring results by gender. We are tracking results wherever it is possible, how we are reaching women, how we are reaching men, and report that in our corporate scorecard, in our reporting, and in our projects. And what we also have is we have a gender strategy, and it's we used to track where projects are gender informed, but that's no longer good enough. We have a gender tag now. That means we identify the gender gap, and we have appropriate measures to close the gender gap. And the baseline is 50%, and we are trying to get up to 60, 70% eventually, of course, ideally to 100%. So this is really incorporated in our interventions. But we also build on the advantages where there is a proven, where there's evidence that involving women is smart and leads to better results. In the Philippines, in the risk mapping of the community-driven development program, reaching women leads to better decision-making with regard to resilience interventions and better disaster preparedness. In India and Nepal, when it comes to forest governance, having a certain number of women on the committee that supervises and monitors illegal logging yields better results than having only a few women on there. So there are approaches that can be replicated, and what it takes is that in the analytical work, we need to look at what does it mean to pay attention to men and women and how they are affected and respond differently, and then incorporate that into our interventions in our lending, in our technical assistance, and in our policy dialogue.
Thanks. I'm going to come back and talk about whether this whether or not this actually changes fundamental approaches. I just came from a panel where, I'll talk to all of you about this, but I just came from a panel where, you know, the concluding comment was, you know, if the economy that we have now, which neither serves women nor serves climate action particularly well, was built predominantly by men, why are we expecting that the same sort of business models and the same economic models and the same decision makers are actually going to be on the forefront of decisions to do something different? And it was sort of left as a hanging question as, of course, the session was abandoned and a new session started just when you get to the really interesting questions. So we'll try and pick that up in a moment, but I think it builds off all of the data work that the bank has done. So let's go to Pakistan. So entrepreneur, activist, working at the international level, working at the national level. How does it look from your perspective?
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel. Of course, gender-responsive policy is critical for me on a personal level as well as on an advocacy level and global policy making at the Secretary General's high-level panel, as well as from the experiences that I've had working as an entrepreneur in the private sector in Pakistan on ground. So while, of course, we have lots of policymakers in the room and COP and the Gender Action Plan is in the making, I would skip that part because we all know a lot about it. But I think what I would like to share are the experiences that we've kind of gone through by actually being in the field in the 47% of the off-grid population of Pakistan that still burns fossil fuels, kerosene, wood for everyday energy consumption, and women, of course, being the most vulnerable in those situations. So me being a CEO of 2 private sector companies for 12 years ago, we wanted to launch a project called Lighting a Million Lives, which was primarily certified by the C4All as well, and a project to bring access to energy to these 47% of off-grid villages. And when we did go to the villages with the primary purpose of just providing energy access, it was a natural choice to choose the women from the villages to be our agents of change, to become our woman energy entrepreneurs. That was not in the initial model, in the initial rollout business case. But when we went to the villages, met the women, it became a natural choice to choose the women to become our energy entrepreneurs and agents of change and become the torch bearers of the energy access and be known as the light ladies of those villages. And I think this was one of the key reasons why the project became such a terrific success and later got certified as an international best practice as well by the UN Foundation. Primarily for 2 reasons. Of course, women are the most vulnerable, as Hart just mentioned. 2 million deaths per year from burning of fossil fuels and kerosene in cooking, in indoor cooking systems, whereby women are, of course, mostly affected. 80% of the displaced in any disaster are usually women, be it floods or earthquakes. The women are the worst in the value chain for getting access to any help. So hence, of course, women are highest on the vulnerability scale for disaster. But then also women prove to be the best kind of agents of change for us. Why? Because one, when we started working with the women from the villages to become our energy entrepreneurs, the projects just became so much more innovative. They just became so much more sustainable. Every day we had some new ingredients coming in our basic energy access project, how we can impact education, how we can impact health, living standards, how we can increase income. So the initial project that started off as just an access to energy project later became a community well-being and community sustainability project because we had the woman as the energy entrepreneurs kind of driving the force. And with the private sector, I think, again, I would like to talk about the private sector because I've experienced a very good, strong momentum of action because we're talking about action now. We all know what needs to be done. All the recommendations are there. We now need to implement them. And I truly believe, from my own experience, that private sector is that driving force of action because with this success story of lighting 1 million lives, what we're doing in Pakistan now is creating partnerships with banks, companies like Nestle with milk chillers all over the country, commercial banks and microfinance banks with thousands of branches all over the country, telecom companies with their telecom towers all across the country, to join hands with us to spread the off-grid movement. Because the 47% of the country that still lives in the dark and burns fossil fuel needs to be impacted, and how. So I think, and that's being sort of translated very successfully. We're going across the country with these infrastructure of all the local banks and telecos and Nestle's to set up our mini grids and create the women in those rural villages as the agents of change and the entrepreneurs running those mini grids, creating an economic outcome for themselves while providing access to clean energy. So in my example, I think it's of course, action needs to be done, yes, but we need to really make it a very inclusive policy for action and include, it's not just the role of the party stakeholders, it's not the role of the governments. The private sector needs to come in, the civil society needs to come in, entrepreneurs like myself need to come in and think about how can we achieve this. And we've done this in Pakistan on both the ground level as well as the decision-making level. Again, going back to what we were talking about here, when I joined the sector 12 years ago, I was the only woman in every room talking about energy in Pakistan. The only woman. In the audience and the panel. Now we have 2. So we have 2 in the audience. So we've kind of quite developed in 12 years. But I recently got this policy launched, working with the Punjab government, to have 33% of women minimum on every board of the energy ministries and on every board of the development ministries of the province, which goes back to our point that we need to have more women in the higher up roles, in the decision-making roles, to be able to trickle down these kind of innovative projects to impact women who get affected. So it's an inclusive policy with all stakeholders for me.
Thank you very much. So you brought us back to the question of participation. I think everybody talked about participation, but talked about participation sort of in the programs and in the projects or in the results of policy that's been put in place. But if this gender action plan that has been approved within at this COP and will hopefully be now the subject of really focused action, if that's going to make a difference, what does it say about participation in sort of the framing and the decision-making around policy at the higher level, right? I mean, it's one thing to target women farmers. It's another to involve women in the thinking about what a climate-smart agricultural investment program or project or government program would look like. So where does the participation in where's the gender? I mean, men have to seed space in some cases, women have to take it, it has to work differently. What does participation look like if this action plan is going to become real? Achim, maybe I come first to you and then back to the Deputy Prime Minister.
I think, I mean, you can answer this in 1,001 ways, but perhaps one fundamental part also of a discussion like this, where does a plan translate into something different? I think first of all, it's visibility. I think part of the challenge of having a gender responsive approach to the NDCs is actually to make the distinct role according to gender visible. And I think this is where we are still often, dealing with the anecdotal rather than the data-based, or more importantly, also trying to understand, particularly when it comes to women, not viewing them as targets of a project or an intervention, but rather as economic actors, as decision makers, as resource managers, as investors, as savers, as technology drivers and entrepreneurs. And I think that's where a strategy and a plan suddenly takes on a different character and a different identity. And, you know, to some extent, this is also true of many interventions that often come through project-based financing and, let's say, central government-driven programs, that those, you know, left behind or that are the center of the focus are viewed more as objects of a project rather than the subjects who actually make the action happen. And I think here we have learned a lot of lessons. I mean, it's not as if we don't know how to do this. I think where a convention and a COP like this becomes an enormous accelerator, and that to me is the exciting part of the strategy or the plan, is that suddenly we have, 160, 170 NDCs becoming vehicles for taking both resource agenda and a different way of looking at actors into the realm of activity, whether it is through international entities, I mean the bank or UNDP, whether it is through the mayor and a program that is done at the city level, entrepreneurial level. I think that's the power of what could come out of this.
Deputy Prime Minister, you talked about the fact that at the international level there may be a certain cultural construct around this, and that has to be interpreted into the reality of the gender roles and the societal structure that you are part of. How do you take sort of an international agreement like this and turn that into something which is enabling and supportive of your economic development?
Well, I think for many small island developing countries, just keeping up to speed with what happens at things like COPs, it's huge. So we try and organize ourselves sensibly, I think, in that, from the global level, filtering it through to regional, we have the Pacific regional, we have the agencies the technical agencies that help us, further screen, I suppose, those programs, target them more succinctly, and then it comes down to the country level. Now, in Samoa's case, I think the nexus of climate and gender, and we're hearing around the room about impacts on people's livelihoods and so forth. And in Samoa, in terms of getting the message through or implementing the action plan, once again, societally, we're organized. We're extended families that are organized into villages. In those villages, there's a particular social infrastructure. Everyone has their roles and functions. So, but I very much agree with our colleague from Pakistan. We've been talking about these things for ages. We know what we want to do. So really, we just need to do it. And, the thing about doing it, and I'm hearing other colleagues, especially the deputy mayor and so forth, you actually learn a lot as well by the actual doing. But I think from a woman's perspective, just get on with it.
I think it's interesting, the Pacific, right? Because there's the political participation is always sort of dragged behind, but Deputy Prime Minister, first President, Marshall Islands, a woman, Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, and then PNG's elections, sort of not one single woman in Parliament, so 2 steps forward, a baby step back, but lots of progress. So I think this political participation, just to keep driving it, that let's just do it attitude. I think we need women in power, in political power, to keep moving that forward. So to women in political power, back to you, Deputy Mayor. Does it matter that there's? I mean, how many women do you need on the budget committee in Quito to sort of make, progressive decisions? I mean, how does the political participation of women drive gender or climate action?
It's very interesting the balance about that, because well, we have Mayor Rodas, and 21 council members are women, and myself as a deputy mayor of environment, and my team, it's about 60% women. So it's a huge secretary with women participation involved in environment. And I would say that in the political level, environment is a key issue in women agenda at the city council members and in the participatory and in neighborhood level, because we are very in touch with the problems and we can feel it. As I mentioned, more or less 60% of Ecuadorians, they are single women. It's amazing how, yeah, more or less, yeah, they are in charge of their families. So participation of women every time is increasing. We will need, I would like to have somebody managing the budget, the whole budget of the municipality, to be a woman. But I guess next years we can achieve that dream.
So can I just skip and then come back to Hart, but skip to, because there was lots of research done, I don't know, 10 years ago, that if you walked into a bank and you presented a business plan, and there was a screen, and so the bank staff person couldn't tell whether it was a woman presenting the plan or a man presenting the plan, you got a certain result. As soon as that screen was taken away and women presented the plan or men presented the plan, the number of successful loan applications for male-owned businesses was substantially higher than for women. I mean, this is research done in Scotland and Canada and Australia and elsewhere. So you're here we are talking about supporting, women in the energy sector in your case or whatever. But does the financial sector, I mean, to what extent is that, well, first of all, is that happening in Pakistan? Is there still a sort of bias? I mean, if women can get access to credit in the first place, but then how do you get the rest of the economic sector to really become a driver of gender responsive business action for climate?
That's very interesting. It does. I didn't know about this research. It's very interesting, and I think it's very relevant. So in Pakistan, for women businesses, access to finance is not just the only problem. We have very unique problems of our own. So I think, okay, I'll give you some facts. 50% of our university graduates are women. 30% of the technical institutions, engineering colleges, are women. 70 to 80% of medical colleges are women, but only 10% of them go into the workforce, go into the economic workforce, right? Be it from the social sciences, economy, climate change, energy, whatever sector, but only 10% translate into the workforce. So because of the cultural norms, you're supposed to get married, an educated woman is a good mother, a good wife, all of those things. And so this, I think, is the first challenge we have. All the women who get educated, trained, have the capacity, skill set, just decide not to go or are told not to go into the formal workforce. So there you go, 90% gone out of it. Now, the 10% that do decide to go in, thereby we have not only problems of access to financing for setting up an enterprise, but the whole turnkey mechanism that a woman or any person requires to become an entrepreneur. The legal regularities, the taxation, formation of the company. I had so many issues so many times. Now I've kind of gotten used to banging my head against a wall and coming back and doing it again. But not everybody likes to do that. So then we have all of, but we've tried to come up with that problem at least and support the women who decide to go into the workforce. We've just set up this Women Business Council for innovative businesses, especially the STEM businesses, all the technology innovative businesses, so that any woman who has an idea to set up anything, any kind of technological innovation, energy innovation, any kind of social enterprise, she goes to this one-stop shop, and which connects her to the banks for financing, which connects her to the lawyers for all kind of legal structures, to the chartered accountants for taxations, and becomes a one-stop shop for helping her convert her ideas into enterprises. So we're trying to curb that problem, but I think the main problem for us with the economic participation lies in the 90% just choosing to stay at home. You know.
So Hart, how then? What's the next step for the World Bank Group? So you talked about really making sure that you've got the analysis right, you've got the data and the evidence. But so as your transport practice, your energy practice, your agriculture practice start kicking in and really driving climate smart development, how does your gender practice even speed that up and improve it? Or is that not yet the way that you think about things?
No, actually, having on my management team the Senior Director for Climate Change, the Senior Director for Gender, and the Senior Director for Fragility on the same management team creates a completely different dynamic over the last 4 months than what we had before. Before, they were all sitting in their silos, and each was individually peddling their approach with the frontline teams, with those who are working with the client, with the governments. Now, they are exploring the interlinkages. We just recently launched an initiative about women and fragility, or the gender dimension of fragility. We do the same thing with gender and climate, and we go very much upstream into the design of projects. Not when they come for the decision, because by that time it's way too late, but upstream when we have a concept note, the gender team and the climate team together sit with the task team and say, hey, if you do a little bit of this, you actually are getting more adaptation benefits. And if you do this, then you really can make this much more gender sensitive and so on. So, and the funny thing is, or not the funny, but the surprising thing is that the teams actually like that, because it helps them change the paradigm. So when I talk to the senior directors who are in charge of gender and climate change, they say, look, you guys are really the change agents. You are changing the default how the World Bank approaches these topics. And so when I look at the different levels, I think we are doing very well. I think that if it was a grade, it would be a B plus, A minus at the local level involving women in activist grassroots activities. I think at the international level, the same thing. But where we are relatively weak is the national level, to make sure that that gender and climate issues together as a combination are actually factored in, not individually, but as a combination. And this is evident when you look at, Achim, you mentioned 190 countries have NDCs, but when you dig a little bit deeper, only 1 out of 3 actually mentions gender or women explicitly. So this is a gap that we need to now work on to close. Just one example. 5 weeks ago, I was in Kabul, and there was a senior officials meeting. And the meeting was opened with a session on women empowerment and women entrepreneurship, chaired by the First Lady. I mean, that was a signal for the entire nation what it means when you really want to empower women.
So I'm very conscious that there are. I'm going off script here a little bit. So the UNFCCC, just take. You're fine. Okay, good. So I'm very conscious that there's a lot of people in this room who've worked very, very hard for many years to fuse these agenda, and I wonder if we can open it up and see if there's any questions from the audience or any insights. I don't know, Lorena, if you want to. At the back there, is that a question? So here's the deal. I'm opening it up, right? So you're going to be really, really short and snappy with your questions, and then we can have this esteemed panel respond. So let's take 3 questions, and we'll try and get different responses to them. So do we have mics in the room, or shall I'll walk around with my mic. Here we go. I'm going to do what in the United States of America is called a Liddy doll, which only people of my generation will remember. Okay, here we go. You have to meet me halfway. Come on here. Okay, short and snappy.
Thank you very much. My name is Teddy Taylor from Liberia. I have a question for the lady from Pakistan. What drove you to this endeavor? I actually want to know what drove you to this endeavor and what methods did you put in place to have this significant success in the midst of a male-dominant society? Thank you.
That was a great question. All the other questions have to be that good.
This is to you and to Akim. How your two organizations can help implement the new gender action plan under UNFCCC?
Okay, that was nearly as good a question. Here we are.
Thank you. Thank you, Raquel. My name is Gilda Munjan. I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the grassroots with the very last mile people. So I'm teaching women from the grassroots to install solar systems. I've learned to myself here in German, so I'm teaching other people. So my question is for the World Bank. Most of the time, I see that the World Bank in my country is dealing with the big institutions like ministries and so on. So how can you support the entrepreneurs, people that they are taking the energy for the last mile people? So we see how climate change affects the people in the rural. So we have solutions ourselves. So how can you support us? Thank you.
Okay, if we keep our answers short, we can even get more questions in. Fiza, do you want to go first?
If I heard the question right, it was what motivated me to do this in Pakistan and in a male-dominated society. It was kind of a natural evolution, I would say, of understanding the real problems of people and understanding the real solutions that were required. When I launched the companies back in 2007, the challenge I was trying to curb was only energy access, considering 47% of the country was off-grid, and the remaining 53% also had 6 to 8 hours of blackouts. So energy was clearly one of the obvious solutions to be given back to the society. And then when we went to the villages, as I earlier mentioned, it was just a natural choice to work with the women and to empower the women to become energy entrepreneurs because they were most vulnerable and because they were the best kind of agents of change. And having done that, it just made obvious sense to now go back to the policymakers and the decision makers of the government and get them to engage more women there and inspire more women to become energy entrepreneurs so that the cycle could continue. So it was really a natural bottom-up approach for me, which now led me to sit on the UN Secretary General's high-level panel and become a part of global policy. But the real experiences, the real learnings, the real inspiration has all really come from the ground. And it just made natural, obvious sense to do what I did.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Art, do you want to respond to the question to you?
Yeah. I've been posted in the field, and I was in Egypt. I've been living in Southern Africa, and one of the most rewarding experiences is when you work with grassroots organizations, where you see they are directly benefiting the people in the villages, in the communities, in the cities, and that makes all the difference. So we have several channels how we can do that. One of the most effective ones is actually working with grassroots organizations on the ground. Very often this goes through small and micro enterprise loans where you are actually supporting single female-headed households, single-headed households where women are getting entrepreneurship opportunities. Small loans of $1,000 can make a huge difference when you can create your own livelihood. And we cannot, the World Bank cannot do that. We don't have the footprint. We don't have the local knowledge. So we are working in partnership with grassroots organizations to reach those women and not only make the loan available, but also entrepreneurial skills, basic skills of accounting, marketing, how to run a business, so that this becomes then sustainable. And eventually the pathway is to make sure that they can actually access the credit market and the finance market.
Achim, I think there was a question about how you and I are going to work together.
Very difficult to imagine, isn't it? Well, Miss Sustainable Energy for All and Mr. UNDP. Well, I think in very simple terms, it's about how can we make women become part of this new energy economy. First of all, through the 3 objectives that are at the center of the initiative that you lead. access, efficiency, and renewables. And I think all three of them are fundamental to addressing a major distortion in our energy economy today in those countries that do not yet have the fundamental access issue solved. It gets more interesting because we think maybe, you know, in Europe or Japan or North America, the issues are not there, but have a look at where is gender in the energy economy of these countries. Yes, at the end of a bill-paying household maybe, but not in the new renewable energy economy that actually brings whole new investor groups, whole new financiers to the market. And I think it could be really interesting to try and also crack this part of the economy in a way that allows, particularly because we're talking about much smaller units, we're talking about locally driven producing communities, there is enormous potential to do things there. So just two examples that I could imagine.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, for us, UNDP is the interface with countries, right? So you're trying to figure out, you know, how to embark on an energy transition, how to speed up the energy transition, and UNDP is going to be one of the first ports of call, and you know, helping UNDP be able to field that in an effective way within the UN system, where there are deep pockets of expertise, but then also to other partners, the World Bank Group and others. I think that's something that we're thinking about together. So I'll say more when I conclude, but there are other hands. I'm going to take one more round of 3 really quick questions, or 2 if there aren't 3, and then we'll give the panel a word.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Eva Larsson from the Green Women in Sweden, and we also represent Gender for Climate Change. My simple question is, do you work with gender budgeting? Or if you not work with gender budgeting, why don't you?
So Sweden, in the leadership on gender budgeting, put a carbon price before anybody else. You know, here we go. Feminist foreign policy. It's all in Sweden. Here we go. Next question.
To Mr. UNDP, Mr. World Bank, and Ms. SE, my name is Kathy Lee. I'm a climate lawyer. I'm based in the US, have done a lot of work in Southern Africa. I was very excited this trip to discover the W+ standard, which is a standard, it's very new, but it's a standard that's basically ranking projects or policies or organizations on the impact on women with health, food security, time, and a whole list of benefits. And I'm wondering to all of you if you think getting that kind of standard out would move the agenda along more quickly.
Any more questions? Okay, those are 2 good questions. And Hart, Achim, anybody? Who's working with gender budgeting? Does UNDP do a gender budget yet? Sorry.
I have to profess my own ignorance. I'm not sure I can answer the question. I will go home and ask it. I mean, there are elements of it that I know of, but I don't think across the whole budget. No.
Bank?
Well, we have embarked on it, but I don't think that we are quite there. It's a long journey to go, but it's the right way to go. Let me answer the question on the standard setting. I think W+ is a good attempt, but there are plenty of other initiatives out there in the about ESG, environment, social, and governance standard settings. And I think this is probably the most dynamic field over the next couple of years, because if we want to get the private sector in, if we want to get investors engaged in helping us create a resilient and low-carbon development path, then we need to actually give them some benchmark or some index that is credible, reliable, and comparable across different projects. And this is one thing that a number of private initiatives are working on, but I think there is a need to harmonize so that we can actually rank or assess projects according to how well they are doing and how well they fit in with regard to environmental, social, and governance criteria. Just wanted to say one last thing on how renewable energy actually helps create jobs, especially for women. There's one example in Haiti for mini-grid electric solar panels and so on, where 1,000 jobs have been created for women. Now, on the global scale, 1,000 jobs doesn't mean much, but for those women, for those 1,000 families, it's a game changer. It changes their life, and they are involved in the sales and the production of certified solar lanterns. So there are opportunities that we just need to exploit.
A last word to you, Fiza. Last word to you, Veronica. Any final thoughts on these questions or others? Gender budgeting in Pakistan, has that taken off yet?
No, it hasn't actually. But it's a good thought. I've made notes. I'm going to go back and start working on it. So last thoughts would just be that for gender responsive climate change, or for climate change in general, or for women empowerment in general, we have lots of case studies done. We have lots of recommendations. We all know what needs to be done. The action plans are now in place. I would just and I give this last thought wherever I am, because I've done this for myself, and I would just like to give it the last thought to all of you in this room, to think of it as an individual responsibility, to question yourself when you walk out of this room or in this COP23, to ask yourself what you will be doing in your individual or institutional capacities to create an influence in this big kind of piece of this pie of gender responsive climate change. What can you do? Anything small matters. Every drop in the ocean counts. And that's kind of how I started. And there was no policy dictating our work. We just went out there, started doing things day by day, kept learning, and everything keeps building on itself, and then it becomes an international best practice all of a sudden. So for me, while the party holders, the governments, everybody needs to take up their responsibility, the question always boils down at an individual level. So my last thoughts would be just for everybody here to take responsibility of this question of climate change and gender responsive climate change, and do what you can in your individual and institutional capacities.
Thank you. Veronica?
It's a great recommendation. I don't have the numbers right now in my mind, but I would say that as a municipal budget, we devote a lot of money for inclusion and gender, not necessarily specifically budget, but there's a budget. And I would say that environment and gender focus should be like a mainstream or very transversal to everything. And we should take into account in a transparent way how much we are investing in gender issues, so we can have these indicators. So I'm taking that recommendation home. Thank you very much.
I'm thinking about Mr. Steiner's comment when he made his first intervention, saying that we're a bit behind the ball. Was that your expression? That Uber and Google do much better about understanding their clients. And both your examples, it's setting my head ticking, and I think I'm going to go away from this panel thinking about that comment. This is the COP, Convention of Parties, state parties. Is there something about states that sort of puts them in that sort of position versus the entrepreneurial outlook? When you're asking that question, why are we not picking up on our clients, so to speak? I am not sure that I have the answer, but I'd really like to go back thinking about that. Is it the politics? So I'm not sure I've been helpful to you, madam.
Deputy Prime Ministers are always helpful as a rule, and you in particular. I think it's a really good question, because the whole of the Paris Agreement is about a ratchet, right? It's about ratcheting up NDCs, but it's about ratcheting best practice and good experience and the lessons of what's working. And it's about competition between mayors that their cities do better. It's about understanding what worked in Pakistan that can be used somewhere else, what worked in Samoa that another island nation could use. And it's about, you know, what we learn from the private sector that can be used in the public sector, what the public sector can bring to the private sector, women and men. The whole thing is a minuet, it's a dance. And I think what we know is that we've got to dance faster and more furiously going forward. I just want to say one thing. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ove Samad from the UNFCCC. But there is a real. We're on a pathway. We're on an energy transition. I mean, a couple of questions are directed to me as SE for All, and that transition is underway. And one assumes and hopes it's going to be inexorable and it's going to go faster, etc. And renewable energy is very much at the heart of that. But it's very interesting because renewable energy is a very young industry. And it makes some of the mistakes that other industries made when they were younger. And we don't like to think about it because it's a progressive industry and it's a clean energy and it's wonderful. But when you acquire land for a renewable energy project, you have to acquire it using free, prior, informed consent for indigenous peoples. You have to use best practice in consultation. It has to be just. Huh? And the mining industry has learnt that, and the oil and gas industry has learnt that, and large infrastructure projects have learnt that the hard way, and they still make mistakes. And we have to be mindful. We have to be conscious of how we build the energy transition going forward. And I think these are some of the things around standards which will become very important going forward. And I agree with everything that Hart said about how important this is going to be. So I would like to... now we go. Here we go. So this is the ratchet, right? Now, here we go.
Well, it's true about the energy industry and how the renewables will learn from the earlier ones. And in the Pacific, and I'm sure this has been the experience of other countries, especially developing countries, it does actually present us with a lot of challenges. Not only the technical aspects of the new energy, but also the legal frameworks around it, the business practice around it. So, you know, we're already finding ourselves on the back foot, so to speak. So once again, it's that challenge. How do we make the quantum leap, you know, to be able to be up to speed, you know, so, you know, working smarter, you know, sort of getting to the core of the issue, being able to address that. But it's always that level playing field, you know, it's always a challenge for developing countries. So new energy is good, it's green. For us in the Pacific, it frees us of the burden of fossil fuels, you know, that take up a large percentage of our budgets and so forth. But at the same time, too, it does present us with challenges.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking this great panel, and we're going to toggle now. So I'm going to hand over the moderation to my colleague from the UNFCCC, Ove Samad. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
I don't know, I'm not sure where we're...
Oh, just stay there. Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all of you, especially to the panelists and colleagues from the United Nations. Deputy Prime Minister, sorry, can you hear me now? A very warm welcome to you on behalf of the UN Climate Change Secretariat that I represent, and I hope you're being well looked after in Bonn. And thank you, and great pleasure to welcome the panelists, and excellent discussion, by the way, and I've learned a lot, and would like to take back from this discussion the gender budgeting, that concept. You're absolutely right, absolutely right. I think we need to do more on that. But my role is to invite the colleagues from the panel to convey their key messages and announcements that they would like to make, and that's Mr. Steiner from the UNDP, Rachel, yourself, and the city mayor from Quito, Ecuador. Because we need to amplify the messages that you're conveying to the world here, and this is the platform that is extremely useful and important to do that. And from UN Climate Secretariat side, what I can say is, and I fully agree also with what the Deputy Prime Minister said, let's get on with it, you know, and I think that's also extremely useful message. And that's exactly what we have done in the UN Secretariat. Fleur, who's our colleague here, who's the gender focal point, and we've just adopted a gender action plan. We don't call it a gender policy, gender coordination, it's gender action plan with very clear action areas that we need to work on, and it's been approved internally. And yes, internally, internally, right, yeah. So, and we need to, we get on with it now. And we've already received a lot of support from various partners, and so that's been quite an achievement, and thanks to Fleur. So with those very brief opening remarks, I'd like to invite Mr. Steiner, Akim, for your announcement, please. If you could just stay there and convey your message, please.
Thank you very much. Together with my colleagues, we have looked at how could we increase the learning capacity of both our own institutional support. UNDP supports since 2008 over 800 climate-related projects in 140 countries. It's actually a remarkable portfolio in terms of size and spread. And so the announcement here is that as part of the NDC Partnership Support Program that we will launch tonight and also tomorrow evening, to identify, or we have identified 10 countries in which a specific focus on gender-sensitive both approaches and implementation strategies will be made part of it. And those 10 countries, they will be on the website. You probably don't want me to read them out right now. But this is a particular focus in terms of how we would like to move forward as part of the overall NDC support program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you. So today we, together with many other organizations, companies, social entrepreneurs, and others are launching what's called the People-Centered Accelerator, which is a partnership of all of the above, more than 40 different entities, focused on the gender equality and the social inclusion, as well as women's empowerment, in the process of extending access to affordable, reliable, clean energy to those who don't have it. So this is part of leaving no one behind, and it's an attempt to have the whole be more than the sum of the parts. There are all kinds of organizations working on how do you reach those who are traditionally outside of energy systems. Maybe they're marginalized because of where they live, by ethnicity, by disability. Many of them are women. There's a big female face on that 1 billion that don't have access. And many people working on them together, but we've come together under the idea that if we work together, we can get more done, we can go further faster, but also that if we work together, build the evidence base and look at the business models and look at the policy models, and then speak collectively to the finance, that we can actually change the energy system, not by extending it so that these who are the furthest are reached last, but actually by trying to reach the furthest first, we can actually change the way that energy systems are thought about and actually built and delivered. So there are going to be different events today. You go on the website, seforall.org. There are more than 40 partner organizations involved in this. We start the work, we have started the work, we're launching today, and we'll come back in a year and tell you whether or not we can make things go faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very well said. Thank you. And Madam Deputy Mayor, please, from Ecuador.
Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure for me to take the floor during this day at COP23 and represent C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, and to present you the Women for Climate Initiative, which is one of our chair's priority for her term. As the first woman to lead C40 and its chair, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, that I represent today, has asked C40 to develop a global initiative designed to support young women leaders and to ensure the full participation of women in the fight against climate change. As just said by several speakers, the role of women is crucial for the changes that our society needs to face in the upcoming years. I don't feel the need to detail more. The Women for Climate initiatives builds on this idea. Women are key when it comes to moving forward a healthier and a safer climate future by changing communities' behavior, both as leaders and engaged citizens. The contribution of female climate leaders such as Cristiana Figueres, Lawrence Tubiana, and Anne Hidalgo was critical in the lead up to COP21 and the signing of the Paris Agreement. The role of the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa and of all the persons working in the gender focal point of UNFCCC, as well as in every C40 cities, is crucial to tackle climate change. So C40 now counts with 16 women mayors in our network of 91 cities. At the local level, women mayors are breaking the glass ceiling in the world's largest and most influential cities, and they are all committed to take ambitious climate actions. With the Women for Climate initiative, C40 wants to drive women's capacity in mobilizing inclusive urban communities to deliver action plans compliant with a climate-safe world. For example, L'Oréal is the first corporate partner that helped C40 develop the three main components of this initiative: a decentralized mentorship program, a dedicated research program, and annual Women for Climate conference. With this Women for Climate initiative, C40 mayors will share their experiences and knowledge with the future generation of women leaders. The mentorship program is therefore dedicated to reaching out to the widest pool of women from a diverse range of backgrounds and will target researchers and scholars, startup-uppers, city officials, of volunteers, and NGO activists whose project will revolutionary future lifestyles and help drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the cities. And I am proud to say that the city of Quito will do so at the beginning of next year, 2018. So thank you very much to listen to me.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Listen, from my side, all remains to be done is to close this session with a deep, very sincere appreciation to all of you, especially to the panelists here. And as has been discussed, I think what is important is to realize that the climate change movement, climate change architecture, is an extremely important vehicle that has already left the station and is going at a very incredible pace. And gender mainstreaming in that process just makes simple sense, business, economic, and socioeconomic. So I think we need to do that, and this is what is happening. And I'd like you to take a moment to stop as you go out and see all the displays and the action that is being put on show there with various partners, and promote that in your own advocacies and your own actions, because that is how we will amplify the action, by coming together collaboratively and in a very cooperative spirit. And that's what we in the United Nations system are trying to do. And it's a work in progress. More needs to be done. There is a lot of good work already, I think, but we need to do more. And from our side, and me personally, I can commit that we will do that and work with all of you very, very closely. So again, thank you very much. I really appreciate this and wish you all the very best. Thank you.